At Christmas dinner, I realized there wasn't a place for me at my own family's table. Not metaphorically, physically. My name simply wasn't there. The table was set for 8, stretched across David's dining room with that long oak slab he and Linda had picked out last spring, polished so clean it reflected the soft glow of the chandelier above. White plates, folded red napkins, little handwritten place cards in gold ink. Emily, Jacob, Linda, David, even the kids had their names neatly printed. I stood there holding my coat, the cold from outside still clinging to my shoulders, and scanned the table again as if I might have missed something obvious. "Oh, Margaret," Linda said, her voice light, almost musical, as she came up behind me carrying a tray of roasted Brussels sprouts. We ran out of cards. "Just sit anywhere." I looked at her, then at the table, then back at her again. "Ran out. For one person. Anywhere." I repeated, keeping my voice even. She smiled, already turning away. "Of course. We're all family here." That was the line that stayed with me. We're all family here. I hung my coat on the rack by the door and took a seat at the far end of the table, near the kitchen, where the noise of the dishwasher hummed under the sound of Bing Crosby singing, "I'll Be Home for Christmas." The irony didn't escape me. I had helped pay for this house, 20% of the down payment, to be exact, pulled from the savings my late husband and I built over 40 years. I remembered signing the check at the kitchen counter of my old place in Naperville, David promising, "It's for all of us, Mom. A place where we can be together." Tonight, I felt like I had walked into someone else's home uninvited. Dinner moved on as if nothing were out of place. Linda carved the ham with steady hands, directing Emily to pass the mashed potatoes, reminding Jacob to use his napkin. David poured wine, Cabernet, a decent bottle, though I noticed he didn't ask me if I wanted any. He simply skipped my glass and moved on. I reached for the breadbasket myself, the motion small but deliberate. If I didn't take space, no one was going to offer it. We finally decided to move forward with the lake property, David said midway through dinner, cutting into his ham without looking up. My hand paused just above my plate. The lake property. The one in Michigan my husband and I bought back in '92, the one I still co-owned, the one with the old dock David used to jump off as a boy. "It's already in motion," Linda added smoothly, setting down the serving spoon. "The paperwork's basically done." I lowered my fork and looked at them, first at my son, then at the woman sitting beside him, so composed, so certain. "When did we decide that?" I asked. The room didn't go silent, but something shifted, like a conversation everyone else had been having suddenly collided with one person who hadn't been invited. David hesitated just for a second, but it was enough for me to see it. He glanced at Linda. She answered before he could. "Oh, Margaret, it's just one of those things that needed to be handled quickly. We assumed you'd be fine with it." Assumed. I leaned back slightly in my chair, folding my hands in my lap to keep them steady. "That's interesting," I said, my tone calm, almost conversational, "because I don't remember being part of that assumption." Linda's smile tightened at the corners, though she kept her voice pleasant. "We didn't want to burden you with all the details. You've been through a lot these past few years." There was carefully packaged concern, delivered like a favor. Across the table, Emily shifted in her seat, her eyes flicking between me and her parents. David picked up his wine glass, taking a longer sip than usual. I let a few seconds pass, just enough to feel the weight of what had been said and what hadn't. Then I reached for my glass, poured myself a small amount of wine, and took a measured sip. If they thought I was too fragile to be included, they had miscalculated. "Well," I said quietly, setting the glass down, "next time there's a decision about something I own, I'd appreciate being part of it." Linda nodded, quick and agreeable. "Of course." But the way she said it, light, dismissive, told me more than the words themselves. Dinner resumed, conversations picking up around me, laughter returning in small bursts. To anyone walking in, it would have looked like a perfectly normal Christmas evening in a comfortable American home. But I sat there, listening more carefully now, watching the way Linda spoke for both of them, the way David deferred without even realizing it. And for the first time, a question formed in my mind that refused to go away. If they were already making decisions about my property without me, what else had they decided I didn't need to know. I stayed through dessert. That was the first decision I made for myself that evening. I did not excuse myself early, and I did not retreat to the guest room the moment things felt uncomfortable. Instead, I watched. I listened. I paid attention in a way I had not needed to before. Linda cleared plates with practiced efficiency, stacking them neatly before carrying them into the kitchen. David followed her lead, gathering glasses, moving quietly, almost carefully, as if he was trying not to disrupt something already in motion. I stood up and joined them, taking 2 plates from the table and walking them into the kitchen. The dishwasher door was already open, racks half filled. Linda glanced at me, just briefly. "You do not have to do that, Margaret," she said, her tone polite but distant. "You are a guest tonight. A guest. In a house I helped buy." I set the plates down anyway and began rinsing them under warm water. "I have never been very good at sitting still," I replied. My voice sounded calm, even to my own ears. Behind me, I could hear Emily and Jacob arguing softly about a board game in the living room, the flicker of a football game playing on the television. Ordinary sounds. Familiar. And yet something underneath all of it felt arranged, like I had stepped into a version of my life that had been edited without my input. Linda moved beside me, loading silverware into the tray with quick, precise motions. "We really were trying to make things easier for you," she said after a moment, not looking up. "With the property and everything. It is a lot to manage." I turned off the faucet and dried my hands slowly with a dish towel hanging from the oven handle. "Easier for me," I repeated, "or simpler for you?" That got her attention. She looked at me then, fully, her expression still composed, but sharper around the edges. "I think we both know it benefits everyone if decisions are streamlined," she said. "David has a lot on his plate, and I handle the logistics." I nodded once, as if I were considering her point. "And where exactly do I fit into that system?" I asked. Before she could answer, David stepped into the kitchen, his presence filling the doorway. "Mom, it is not like that," he said quickly. "We were going to tell you. It just happened fast." I met his eyes, fast enough that there was no time for a phone call. He hesitated again, and that hesitation told me more than any explanation he could have offered. Linda stepped in smoothly, placing a hand on his arm. "Let us not turn Christmas into a legal discussion," she said lightly. "We can go over everything later." Later, another word that pushed things out of reach. I folded the dish towel neatly and set it back where I found it. "I agree," I said. "We should go over everything." I made sure to emphasize the last word. Linda gave a small, satisfied smile, as if she had just restored order to the evening. David exhaled, relieved, and the tension in the room eased just enough for them to believe the moment had passed. We returned to the living room. Emily handed me a mug of hot cocoa with tiny marshmallows floating on top, the kind she knew I liked. "You okay, Grandma?" she asked quietly. I touched her hand. "I am fine," I said. And in that moment, I was not lying. I was thinking. As the night wound down and coats were gathered from the rack, I reached for mine and slipped it on, feeling the weight of the evening settle into something clearer, more defined. David walked me to the door. "Drive safe, Mom," he said, pulling me into a quick hug. "We will talk soon, okay?" I stepped back and looked at him, really looked this time. "Yes," I said. "We will." Outside, the air was sharp, the kind of cold that made your breath visible in front of you. I walked to my car, a dark blue sedan I had driven for years, and sat behind the wheel for a moment before starting the engine. The house behind me glowed with warm light, laughter still faintly spilling out as the door opened and closed. I reached into my purse for my keys and felt something else brush against my fingers. A folded piece of paper. I did not remember putting anything like that in there. I pulled it out and unfolded it slowly under the dim glow of the dashboard light. It was a printed email. My name was at the top, and at the bottom, there was a signature that looked exactly like mine. I did not start the car right away. I sat there in the driveway with the engine idling, the heater slowly pushing warm air into the cold space around me, and I read the email again. Then I read it a third time. The subject line was simple: property transfer authorization. My name was typed at the top, Margaret Collins, followed by my home address in Naperville. The body of the email was brief, confirming approval for preliminary steps related to the lake property. At the bottom, there was again my name, signed in a flowing script that looked so much like my own handwriting that, at a glance, I might have believed I had written it. But I knew my hand. I knew the slight tilt of my letters, the way I looped my G, the pressure I put on the pen. This was close, but it was not mine. I turned the paper over, as if there might be something on the back that would explain it, but it was blank, just a single printed page, folded neatly enough to fit inside my purse. Someone had placed it there. That realization settled in slowly, like a weight finding its place. It had not fallen in by accident. It had been put there intentionally. I glanced back at the house. The front door opened briefly, a burst of light spilling onto the snow-dusted walkway as someone stepped out, then closed again. From this distance, I could not tell who it was. For a moment, I considered walking back up to the door, holding the paper out, asking a direct question in front of all of them. But something stopped me. Not fear, not hesitation. It was a sense that I was only seeing the edge of something much larger. And if I confronted them now, I would be reacting, not understanding. I folded the paper carefully along the same crease and placed it back into my purse. Then I reached for my phone and opened my email. The signal in that neighborhood was always a little weak, but after a few seconds, my inbox loaded. I searched for the subject line. Nothing. I searched for lake property. A few old messages appeared, most of them from years ago, conversations between me and my husband about repairs, insurance, taxes. No recent thread. No suggestion. No record of anything like what I held in my hand. All right, I murmured to myself, my voice barely audible over the hum of the heater. So, this did not come from me. Saying it out loud made it real in a different way. This was not just about being left out of a conversation. This was about someone stepping into my place and speaking as if they were me. I started the car and backed slowly out of the driveway, the tires crunching softly over the thin layer of snow. The streets were quiet, most of the neighborhood already settled in for the night, Christmas lights blinking in steady patterns along rooftops and porches. As I drove, my mind moved through the past few months, not as a blur, but as a series of moments that now seemed to carry a different weight. The afternoon Linda had asked me to simplify my email settings because she said it would help David manage shared documents. The time David had mentioned, almost casually, that he would handle the paperwork for the property taxes this year. The day, I noticed a bank envelope already opened on my kitchen counter, with Linda explaining she had stopped by to drop something off and thought she would save me the trouble. At the time, each of those moments had felt small, even helpful. Now they lined up in a way that made my grip tighten slightly on the steering wheel. When I reached a red light on Maple Avenue, I stopped and looked down at my phone again. I opened my contacts and scrolled to a name I had not needed in quite some time, Robert Reynolds. My attorney. He had handled my husband's estate, every detail, every document, with a level of care that had earned my complete trust. My thumb hovered over his name for a second. Then I pressed call. It rang twice before going to voicemail. Mr. Reynolds, this is Margaret Collins, I said after the tone. I hope you are well. I would like to schedule a meeting as soon as possible. There are some documents I need you to review. I paused, choosing my next words carefully. And I believe someone may have been signing on my behalf. I ended the call and set the phone down on the passenger seat. The light turned green, and I continued driving, the road stretching out ahead of me, quiet and clear. By the time I pulled into my driveway, the decision had settled into something firm. I was not going to ask what they had done. I was going to find out. Inside the house, everything was just as I'd left it that morning. The small artificial tree in the corner still lit, the clock on the wall ticking steadily, a stack of unopened mail sitting on the kitchen counter. I took off my coat, set my purse down, and pulled the folded email out once more, placing it flat on the table under the overhead light. Then I walked to the cabinet, took out my reading glasses, and sat down. If this document existed, there had to be more. And the next question was no longer whether something had been done behind my back. It was how many things had already been decided without me. I did not go to bed that night. I made a cup of tea, the same chamomile I had been drinking for years, and sat at the kitchen table with the email laid flat in front of me and my laptop open beside it. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that makes every small sound feel louder. The ticking clock, the hum of the refrigerator, the soft creak of the floor when I shifted in my chair. I adjusted my reading glasses and began where I always begin when something does not add up. I checked the details. The email I had found in my purse listed a sender address, something official-looking, tied to a real estate management company I vaguely recognized. I typed it into my search bar. Within seconds, the company's website appeared. Legitimate, based out of Grand Rapids, Michigan. That part checked out. Then I looked at the date on the printed email. 2 weeks ago. I opened my email account again and filtered by that exact date. Nothing. Not in my inbox, not in spam, not in archived folders. I leaned back slightly, letting that settle. If the email had been real, it would have left a trace. It had not. That meant the document in front of me had not been forwarded to me. It had been created, printed, and placed in my purse to serve a purpose I did not yet fully understand. I reached for my phone and dialed the number listed on the real estate company's website. It rang twice before a man answered. Lakeshore Property Services, this is Kevin speaking. Hello, Kevin, I said, keeping my tone steady and polite. My name is Margaret Collins. I'm calling about a property in Lake Morrison. I believe there may have been some recent activity, and I would like to confirm a few details. I heard the faint clicking of a keyboard on his end. Sure, ma'am. Give me just a moment. Okay, I see the property here. What would you like to know? I glanced down at the printed email. I would like to know who authorized the initial steps for a transfer or sale. There was a pause, not long, but noticeable. According to our records, he said slowly, we received authorization through a digital signature. It appears to be from you. My fingers tightened slightly around the edge of the paper. And how was that signature obtained? I asked. Was it through a verified email account? Another pause, this one longer. It was submitted through a DocuSign process, he replied. The email associated with it is, let me confirm. Yes, it matches the contact email we have on file for you. I felt something shift, not confusion this time, but clarity sharpening into focus. Would you please read that email address back to me? I said. He did. It sounded correct at first. My name, my usual provider, but there was a subtle difference, a single extra letter tucked into the middle that most people would not notice unless they were looking closely. I closed my eyes for a brief second, letting the precision of that detail settle into place. Thank you, Kevin, I said. One more question. Who initiated the DocuSign request? It came from a secondary contact listed on the account, he answered. A Linda Harris. Linda, not even subtle. Not hidden behind layers of strangers or third parties. Direct, clean, confident, as if she had never considered the possibility that I might look closely enough to see it. I appreciate your help, I said, my voice calm, almost conversational. Please do not proceed with any further actions on that property until you hear directly from me. Understood, ma'am, he replied quickly. We will put a hold on everything until we receive confirmation. I ended the call and set the phone down slowly. For a moment, I simply sat there looking at the email, the laptop screen, the quiet kitchen around me. This was no longer a question of being left out. This was a matter of someone stepping into my identity, creating a version of me that signed documents, approved decisions, and cleared the way for actions I had never agreed to. And she had done it carefully enough to pass as legitimate. Almost. I reached for my purse and pulled out the printed email again, smoothing it flat with the palm of my hand. Then I stood, walked to the small desk in the corner of the living room, and opened the drawer where I kept my important papers. Property deeds, insurance policies, copies of wills. Everything organized, labeled, and exactly where it should be. I took out the folder marked Lake Morrison and carried it back to the table. As I opened it, a thought surfaced, clear and unmistakable. If Linda had gone this far with the lake property, then this was not the beginning. It was just the first place I had managed to catch her. And the real question now was not whether she had forged my signature once, it was how many times she had already done it without being caught. I did not rush. That was the second decision I made. I did not call Linda that night. and I did not drive back over to David's house demanding answers. Instead, I pulled the Lake Morrison folder closer and began going through each document, one by one, the way Robert Reynolds had taught me years ago, slow, deliberate, and attentive to the smallest details. The original deed was exactly where it should be, my name clearly listed alongside my late husband's, with no amendments filed afterward. The property tax statements were current, paid through my account, nothing unusual there. But when I reached the back of the folder, I found something I did not remember placing there. A printed confirmation from a courier service, dated 10 days ago, addressed to a title company in Michigan. The sender field listed my name. I stared at it for a long moment, then turned it over, checking for any notes, any indication of what had been sent. Nothing. Just a tracking number and a delivery confirmation stamped received. My phone buzzed on the table, the sound sharp in the quiet room. I glanced at the screen. David. I let it ring once, twice, then I picked up. "Hi, Mom," he said, his voice carrying that careful tone I had heard earlier in the kitchen. "I just wanted to make sure you got home okay." "I did," I replied. "Thank you." There was a brief pause. "About earlier," he continued, "I feel like things got a little tense. Linda and I were just trying to get ahead of some decisions. We did not want to stress you out." I looked down at the courier confirmation, my finger tracing the printed date. "You said the paperwork was already in motion," I said. "What exactly has been sent out, David?" Another pause, longer this time. "Just preliminary stuff," he said. "Nothing final. It is all standard. You know how these things go." I leaned back in my chair, letting the silence stretch just enough for him to feel it. "I don't know how these things go," I said evenly. "That is why I am asking." I could almost picture him glancing toward Linda the way he had at the dinner table. When he spoke again, his tone had shifted slightly, more cautious. "Mom, maybe it would be better if we all sat down together and went over everything. Linda has been coordinating with the companies involved, so she can explain it better than I can." There was again. "Linda has been coordinating. I think that would be a good idea," I said. "When were you planning to have that conversation?" "Soon," he replied quickly. "We just wanted to get through the holidays first." I let out a quiet breath, not quite a sigh. "David," I said, "if documents are already being sent out in my name, then the conversation should have happened before that." He did not respond right away. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer. "We thought you trusted us." I picked up the courier confirmation and held it closer, reading the tracking number again as if it might reveal something new. "Trust does not mean silence," I said, "and it certainly does not mean signing my name without me." The line went very still. "What do you mean?" he asked. I did not answer immediately. Instead, I set the paper back down and reached for my pen, writing the tracking number neatly on a notepad beside my laptop. I said finally, that I'm going to look into every document that has been processed under my name, starting with whatever was sent through this courier service 10 days ago. I heard a faint shift on his end, the kind of movement that comes when someone is no longer comfortable. "Mom, you're making this sound bigger than it is," he said. "It is just paperwork." "Paperwork," I repeated, my voice calm but firm, "is exactly how ownership changes hands." Another silence followed, heavier this time. Then, more quietly, he said, "Linda has been handling those details." "Of course she has." I closed my eyes for a brief second, not out of frustration, but to steady the clarity that was settling in. This was no longer just about Linda acting on her own. David knew. Maybe not every detail, but enough. Enough to defer. Enough to let it happen. "Then Linda and I will need to have a very specific conversation," I said. "Sooner rather than later." "Okay," he replied, though there was hesitation in it now. "We can set something up." I ended the call without another word and looked back down at the tracking number. My laptop was still open. It took less than a minute to pull up the courier website and enter the number. The page loaded, showing the shipment details. Sent for Naperville. Delivered to a title office in Grand Rapids. Contents, signed authorization documents. I sat there, staring at those 3 words. Signed authorization documents. Not drafts. Not inquiries. Signed and sent. That meant something had already moved forward beyond discussion. I reached for my phone again, this time not to call David, but to take a photo of the courier confirmation and the tracking details on my screen. Evidence. Clear, simple, undeniable. Then I leaned back in my chair and looked around my kitchen at the cabinets I had chosen, the table I had sat at for years, the life I had built piece by piece. They thought they were managing things for me, simplifying, streamlining. But what they were actually doing was rewriting ownership one document at a time. And now that I had proof of something already sent out in my name, the situation had shifted. This was no longer about stopping a future decision. It was about intercepting something that was already in motion. And the next question I needed answered was simple, but it carried weight. What exactly had already been transferred before I even realized I was no longer the one in control? I did not wait until morning. That was the shift. By the time the clock on my wall read 1:12 a.m., I'd already opened a new notebook, the one I used only for things that mattered, and written 3 names across the top of the first page. Lake Morrison Property, courier shipment, digital signature. Underneath, I began listing everything I knew, not what I felt, not what I suspected, but what I could prove. Dates, times, documents, every detail anchored to something real. Because if there was one thing I had learned over the years, it was this: clarity comes from evidence, not emotion. My phone buzzed again, a notification this time. An email. I opened it immediately. It was from Robert Reynolds' office. Not him directly, but his assistant confirming an appointment for the next morning at 10:30 a.m. "We have reserved time to review your documents," the message read. I allowed myself a small nod. Good. That meant I did not have to wait. I turned back to my laptop and opened my bank account. Not because I expected to see something obvious, but because patterns often hide in plain sight. The account summary loaded slowly, line by line, transactions stretching back over the past 90 days. Most of it looked normal: utilities, groceries, property taxes. Then one entry caught my eye: a wire transfer fee. Small, almost forgettable, $25, dated 11 days ago. I clicked into it, pulling up the details. The description was vague, but the receiving institution was not. A title services company in Michigan, the same city listed on the courier confirmation. I leaned forward, my elbows resting lightly on the table. "All right," I said quietly to myself. So money moved too. That was new. That was concrete. Documents could be printed, signatures could be imitated, but money left a trail that was harder to disguise. I wrote the transaction down in my notebook, underlining it once. Then I reached for my phone and dialed the bank. After navigating the automated system, a woman answered, her voice steady and professional. "Thank you for calling. This is Karen. How can I assist you today?" "Hi, Karen," I said. "My name is Margaret Collins. I am reviewing a transaction from about 11 days ago, a wire transfer fee connected to a title company in Michigan. I need to understand how that transaction was authorized." I heard the faint clicking of keys. "Let me take a look," she said. "Can you confirm the last 4 digits of your account?" I did. Another pause. "Okay," she continued. "I see the transaction. It was initiated through online banking using your credentials." I felt the words settle into place. "Using my credentials," I repeated. Was there any secondary verification? A phone confirmation? A security code? "Yes, ma'am," she said. "A one-time passcode was sent to the phone number on file and entered correctly." I looked down at my phone sitting on the table. The same phone that had not left my possession that entire day. "And what time was that code entered?" I asked. She gave me the exact time. I flipped back through my memory. That was the afternoon Linda had stopped by my house. She had said she was in the neighborhood and wanted to drop off a casserole dish from Thanksgiving. I remembered letting her in, making coffee, stepping into the other room to grab something from the pantry. My hand tightened slightly around the pen. "Thank you, Karen," I said. "I may need to follow up on this, but that answers my question for now." I ended the call and set the phone down slowly. The room felt different now, not heavier, but sharper. Pieces that had seemed separate were beginning to connect. Access to my email, access to my home, access to my phone, even if only for a moment. I opened a new page in my notebook and wrote a single line across the top. Points of access. Underneath, I listed them one by one. Email account, physical mail, bank authentication. Each one tied to a moment where Linda had been present, helpful, involved. Too involved. I leaned back in my chair and allowed myself to think one step ahead. Not about what had already been done, but about what they believed was happening. They thought I was unaware. They thought I was trusting. Passive, perhaps even overwhelmed enough to let them handle things. That assumption was their advantage. For now, I closed my laptop and gathered the documents into a neat stack, sliding them into a folder I would take with me in the morning. Then I stood, walked to the hallway, and picked up my coat, checking the pockets carefully. Keys, wallet, phone, everything where it should be. No surprises. No extra papers. No unseen these gents. When I returned to the kitchen, I turned off the lights, leaving only the small glow from the tree in the corner of the living room. As I stood there for a moment, looking at the quiet space around me, a new understanding settled in. Not fear, not even anger, but something more precise. They had been moving quietly, step by step, believing they were ahead. But now I knew how they were doing it. And once you understand the method, you can change the outcome. I picked up my phone again and opened my contacts, scrolling to Linda's name. I did not call her. Not yet. Instead, I saved a new contact beneath it. Lakeshore Property Services. Title Company. Bank Fraud Department. One by one, I entered the numbers, building something that looked less like a reaction and more like a plan. Because the next time I sat across from Linda, it was not going to be a conversation about what I thought. It was going to be about what I could prove. And the question she would not be expecting was the one I was already preparing to ask. Who else had she convinced to accept my signature without ever hearing my voice? I arrived at Robert Reynolds' office 10 minutes early, which is exactly how I have always handled important matters. The building sat on a quiet corner in downtown Naperville, red brick, polished brass handles, the kind of place that does not change much over time. I appreciated that. Some things should remain steady. Inside, the receptionist greeted me by name, and within a few minutes, I was seated across from Robert in his office, the same office where I had once sat beside my husband, going over wills and insurance policies, making decisions we believed would protect everything we had built. Margaret, he said, leaning forward slightly, his tone both professional and familiar. You sounded concerned on the phone. Tell me what is going on. I did not rush through it. I laid everything out in order. The email found in my purse, the digital signature that was not mine, the courier confirmation, the wire transfer fee, the phone call with the property service, the detail about the altered email address. I slid the documents across his desk one by one, letting the evidence speak alongside me. Robert did not interrupt. He read carefully, occasionally making a note with his pen, his expression growing more focused with each page. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. All right, he said. Let us separate what we know from what we suspect. I nodded. That was exactly why I had come. He tapped the printed email first. This is fabricated. It was not sent through your account. Then he moved to the courier confirmation. This indicates documents were physically delivered to a title company. Finally, he glanced at the notes I had written about the bank transaction. And this confirms that at least one financial action was taken using your credentials. He looked up at me. Margaret, this is not a misunderstanding. This is unauthorized representation at minimum, and potentially fraud. The word did not shock me. By the time he said it, I was already there. What can they actually do with what they have already sent? I asked. Robert reached for a legal pad and began outlining quickly. That depends on the stage of the transaction, he said. But here's the important part. You still hold legal ownership. Nothing transfers without proper verification. And from what I see, that verification did not happen correctly. He paused, then added, however, they were close. Close enough that if you had not caught this, the next step might have gone through. I felt a shift then. Not fear, not even anger, just a clear recognition of timing. I had not discovered this early, but I had discovered it before it was too late. So what do we do now? I asked. Robert gave a small, deliberate nod. Now we take control of the process. He turned the legal pad toward me, outlining the next steps. First, he would send a formal notice to the title company and the property service, placing an immediate legal hold on any activity related to the property. Second, we would flag the transaction with my bank as potentially unauthorized, triggering an internal review. Third, and most important, he would prepare an affidavit stating that any signatures or approvals submitted on my behalf without my direct, verifiable consent were invalid. This document, he said, tapping the page, puts you back in full control. It establishes a clear legal boundary. I looked at the list, then back at him. And what about Linda? I asked. Robert did not answer immediately. He chose his words carefully. You have two options, he said. You can confront her directly now, or you can let this process move forward quietly and confront her once everything is secured. I considered that for a moment. Confrontation now would be emotional, reactive. Waiting would be strategic, controlled. I would prefer the second option, I said. I want everything in place before I say a word. Robert gave a slight smile, one that carried a hint of approval. That is what I would recommend. He gathered the documents and began organizing them into a formal file. There's one more thing you should be aware of, he added. If she was confident enough to submit documents on your behalf, it suggests she believes she has consistent access, either to your accounts, your mail, or your devices. I nodded. I have already started mapping that out, I said. Good, he replied, because once we secure the legal side, you will need to close those gaps immediately. He stood, signaling the meeting was coming to a close. I will have the first notices drafted by this afternoon. You will receive copies by email and certified mail. I rose as well, gathering my purse. Thank you, Robert, I said. You may have just prevented something far more complicated. He gave a small nod. You caught it in time, he said. That makes all the difference. As I stepped out of his office and into the hallway, I felt the balance shift in a way that was undeniable. Yesterday, I had been reacting to something I did not fully understand. Today, I had a structure, a plan, and legal standing firmly on my side. But as I reached the front door and stepped out into the crisp morning air, another thought settled in, sharper than the rest. Linda had acted with confidence. Not hesitation, not uncertainty, confidence, which meant she had done this before, or at the very least, she believed she could do it again. And the next time I saw her, she was not going to know that everything had already changed. I did not call Linda that day. That was deliberate. By the time I got back home from Robert's office, the legal hold was already in motion, and for the first time since Christmas dinner, I was not reacting. I was ahead. I set my purse down on the kitchen counter, placed the folder neatly beside it, and poured myself a glass of water. Then I waited, because if Linda believed everything was proceeding as planned, she would not stop. She would move forward, and movement, when you know where to look, leaves traces. It did not take long. Around 2:15 p.m., my phone rang. Linda's name appeared on the screen. I let it ring once, then answered. Hi, Linda, I said, keeping my voice even, almost warm. Margaret, she replied, her tone bright, confident, the same tone she used when everything was under control. I was just about to call you. I wanted to go over a few details about the property. We're getting closer to finalizing things. Closer. That word told me exactly what I needed to know. That sounds important, I said. What kind of details? There was a slight pause, not hesitation, but calculation. Just standard confirmations, she said. The title company needs to make sure everything is aligned before moving to the next step. It is mostly procedural. I walked slowly toward the living room, giving myself space to think while I spoke. And what would you need from me? I asked. Actually, she said, and I could hear a small smile in her voice. Nothing complicated. I might stop by later this afternoon with a couple of documents. It will only take a few minutes. Just signatures, really. Just signatures. I stopped walking. That was the escalation. Not behind my back this time. In front of me. Clean. Direct. This afternoon? I repeated. Yes, she said. I figured it would be easier to handle in person. You know, keep everything moving smoothly. Smoothly. Efficiently. Quietly. I let a second pass before responding. All right, I said. You can come by. Perfect, she replied quickly. I will be there around 4. When I ended the call, I stood still for a moment, letting the pieces fall into place. Yesterday, she had been operating. Without me. Today, she was stepping directly into my space, expecting cooperation. That meant one thing. She believed whatever she had done so far would hold. She believed I would sign. I walked back into the kitchen, pulled out a chair, and sat down, resting my hands lightly on the table. Then I reached for my phone and opened my messages. There was already a new email from Robert Reynolds. I tapped it open. Attached were copies of notices he had sent. Formal, precise, and unmistakable. Legal hold confirmed. Title company notified. Authorization revoked, pending verification. I read each line carefully, then saved the documents to my phone. Evidence ready when I needed it. Next, I opened my settings and changed my email password, then my bank login, then every account that had even the slightest connection to anything Linda might have touched. Each step was small, controlled, irreversible. By the time I finished, the access she had relied on was gone. Then I stood, walked to the front window, and looked out at the quiet street. A light snow had started to fall, soft and steady, covering the sidewalks in a thin white layer. At exactly 3:58 p.m., a familiar SUV turned the corner and slowed in front of my house. Linda stepped out, dressed neatly as always, a leather folder tucked under her arm. She looked confident, relaxed, certain. I opened the door before she could knock. "You're right on time," I said. She smiled as she stepped inside, brushing a few snowflakes from her coat. "I try to be," she replied. Her eyes moved briefly around the room, taking in the familiar space, then settled back on me. "This will not take long," she added, holding up the folder. "We just need to get a few things signed, so we can keep everything on track." I stepped aside, gesturing toward the table. "Of course," I said. "Let's take a look." She walked in, placed the folder down, and opened it with practiced ease, sliding a set of documents toward me along with a pen. I did not touch them immediately. Instead, I looked at her, really looked at her. The calm confidence, the expectation, the certainty that this would go exactly the way she planned. Then I lowered my gaze to the top page. My name was printed there again. Margaret Collins. Signature line waiting. I picked up the pen slowly, turning it once between my fingers. Linda leaned forward slightly, her voice soft, reassuring. "It is all standard," she said. "Nothing to worry about." I met her eyes, the pen still in my hand. "I'm sure it is," I replied. And in that moment, I realized something important. She had come here expecting control. She had no idea she had already lost it. And the next move I made was going to decide exactly how far she had already gone. I lowered my eyes back to the document, letting a few seconds pass before I spoke again. Not hesitation, timing. I wanted her to settle into her expectation. Linda shifted slightly in her chair, watching me with that same composed patience she had perfected over the years. She believed this moment was routine, predictable. I reached forward and slid the top page a few inches closer, enough to read the header clearly. Authorization for transfer proceedings, it said in bold letters. Beneath it, smaller text outlined preliminary consent. Language designed to look harmless unless you understood what it led to. I picked up the pen again, this time resting it lightly against the paper without writing. "Walk me through this one," I said, my tone casual, almost conversational. Linda nodded immediately, leaning forward, her voice smooth and practiced. "It is just confirming that we can move forward with the process," she explained. "It does not finalize anything. It just keeps things on track, so we do not lose time." I glanced up at her briefly. "And if I do not sign it?" I asked. She smiled, but there was a slight tightening at the edges this time. "Then things slow down," she said. "We would have to revisit steps we have already completed. It would complicate things unnecessarily." Already completed. That phrase landed exactly where I expected it to. I let the pen rest on the paper, then lifted it again, turning it once between my fingers as if I were considering her explanation. "You mentioned earlier that everything is already in motion," I said. "What exactly has been submitted so far?" She did not answer immediately. Instead, she reached into the folder and pulled out another page, sliding it toward me. "These are just confirmations," she said. "Standard progress points. Nothing final." I looked down. The page listed transaction milestones, initial authorization, document preparation, submission, to title review. Each item marked with a date. Each step aligned with what I had already uncovered the night before. The courier shipment, the wire transfer, The digital signature. It was all there, laid out cleanly, as if it had been done properly. I nodded slowly, as if I were following along. "You have been busy," I said. Linda gave a small, satisfied laugh. "I like to stay ahead of things," she replied. "It makes life easier for everyone." I placed the pen down beside the paper and leaned back slightly in my chair. "You always have," I said. And that was true. Linda had always been efficient, organized, helpful. That was how it started. That was how it grew. Not through force, but through access, through presence, through small moments where stepping in felt like support instead of control. I reached for my phone, unlocking it as if absent-mindedly. "Do you mind if I take a quick photo of this?" I asked, gesturing to the document. "I like to keep records." Linda hesitated for the first time since she arrived. It was brief, almost invisible, but I saw it. Then she nodded. "Of course," she said. "That makes sense." I lifted the phone and took a clear photo of the page, making sure the dates and headings were visible. Then I set the phone back down, screen facing me. I was not just keeping records. I was documenting her version of the story. "You said the title company is expecting this today?" I asked. "Yes," she replied. "They are ready to move to the next phase as soon as this is signed." I tapped the pen lightly against the table once, then picked it up again. "All right," I said. "Let me read through it carefully." Linda nodded, relaxing slightly, her shoulders easing as she leaned back in her chair. She thought the moment had resolved, that the outcome was already decided. I lowered my gaze to the document again, scanning each line slowly, deliberately. Not because I needed to understand it, I already did, but because I wanted her to sit in that confidence just a little longer. Across from me, she reached for her phone, glancing at the screen, already moving ahead in her mind, planning the next step, assuming cooperation. I let another few seconds pass, then I set the pen down once more. "You know," I said quietly, "it is interesting how much can be done with the right access." She looked up, her expression unchanged, but her attention sharper now. "What do you mean?" she asked. I met her eyes, my tone still calm, still measured. "Email accounts, phone codes, documents sent without a conversation." I let the words hang there, not accusing, not explaining, just placing them on the table between us. Linda did not respond immediately. For the first time since she arrived, there was a pause she did not control. And in that pause, something shifted. Not outwardly, not enough for anyone else to notice. But I felt it. The balance had moved. She no longer knew exactly where I stood. I picked up the pen again, holding it just above the signature line. "I just want to be sure we are all working with the same understanding," I said. Linda straightened slightly, her voice careful now. "Of course," she replied. I gave a small nod, then lowered the pen just enough to make it look like I might sign. Then I stopped, because the truth was this moment was no longer about the document in front of me. It was about timing, and I was not finished gathering what I needed. I set the pen down gently and folded my hands on the table. "Before I sign anything," I said, "there is one more detail I would like clarified." Linda's eyes fixed on me, her confidence no longer as effortless as it had been a few minutes ago. And what I was about to ask was not something she had prepared for. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. By the time I spoke again, the room had already shifted in a way Linda could feel, even if she could not yet name it. "Before I sign anything," I said, keeping my hands folded neatly on the table, "I want to understand how my authorization was already submitted 2 weeks ago." The words landed quietly, but they did not drift. They settled. Linda's expression did not collapse, not immediately. She was too controlled for that. But something in her posture changed, a slight tightening in her shoulders, a recalibration. "I'm not sure what you mean," she replied, her tone measured, careful. I reached for my phone without breaking eye contact and turned the screen toward her. The photo I had taken earlier filled the display, the timeline of submitted documents, the dates clearly visible. Then, with a small movement of my thumb, I brought up the second image, the courier confirmation with the tracking number and delivery stamp. "I mean this," I said. She glanced at the screen, then back at me, her expression neutral but no longer effortless. "That is just part of the process," she said. "Preliminary steps. It does not mean anything has been finalized. I nodded slightly. That is what you said, I replied. Then I tapped the screen again, bringing up the third piece, the email printout with the signature. And this? I asked. That was submitted under my name. Linda did not answer right away. For the first time since she had walked into my house, she needed a moment. Not long, but enough. Margaret, she said finally, her voice softer now, more deliberate, we have been trying to move things forward efficiently. Sometimes that means handling details in advance so you are not overwhelmed. I let that sit for a second, then leaned forward just enough to close the distance between us. Using my name is not a detail, I said. It is authority. The word hung there, clear and unmistakable. Linda's fingers tightened slightly around the edge of the folder. We had access, she said, choosing her words carefully. You gave us access. You trusted us to help manage things. I gave a small nod. Access to help is not the same as permission to decide, I replied. The distinction was simple, precise, and impossible to soften. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The house was quiet again, the faint sound of the heater kicking on in the background, the soft ticking of the clock on the wall. Then Linda straightened in her chair, her composure returning, but not quite the same as before. There was calculation now, not just confidence. So what are you saying? She asked. I reached into my purse and pulled out the folded documents Robert had sent me earlier that afternoon. I did not slide them across the table yet. I simply placed them in front of me, my hand resting lightly on top. I am saying, I began, my voice steady, that I spoke with my attorney this morning. That was the moment the air changed. Not dramatically, not loudly, but enough. Linda's eyes flicked down to the papers, then back up to my face. You did not need to do that, she said quickly. This could have been handled between us. I held her gaze. It is being handled, I said, just not the way you expected. I lifted the top page and turned it toward her, just enough for her to see the letterhead. Robert Reynolds. Legal notice of authorization hold. I did not push it closer. I let her lean in if she wanted to read it. She did not. Instead, she sat very still, her expression controlled, but no longer certain. The title company has been notified, I continued. So has the property service. And my bank. I paused, just long enough for each piece to register. Nothing moves forward without direct confirmation from me. Not my email. Not my phone. Me. Linda's lips pressed together briefly, then relaxed. This is an overreaction, she said, though there was less conviction in it now. We were trying to streamline things. That is all. I shook my head once, slowly. No, I said. You were trying to replace my voice with something easier to manage. The sentence did not rise. It did not need to. It landed exactly where it needed to. Linda exhaled, a controlled breath, then leaned back in her chair, reassessing. The dynamic between us was no longer what it had been when she walked in. She was no longer leading the conversation. She was responding to it. And that was the difference. I slid the unsigned document back toward her, the pen resting beside it, untouched. I am not signing anything today, I said. Not until I have a complete record of everything that has already been submitted in my name. She looked at the paper, then at me. That could take time, she said. Exactly, I replied. Another silence followed, heavier now, filled with things neither of us needed to say out loud. Finally, Linda closed the folder slowly, her movements more deliberate than before. We will need to discuss this with David, she said. I nodded. We will. I stood, signaling the conversation was no longer hers to control. Linda remained seated for a moment longer, then gathered her things and rose as well. At the door, she paused, her hand on the handle, her voice quieter than it had been when she arrived. You are making this more complicated than it has to be, she said. I met her eyes one last time. No, Evropia. I'm making it accurate. She held my gaze for a second, then opened the door and stepped out into the cold. I closed it behind her, the sound firm, final. Then I turned back toward the table, where the space she had occupied just minutes ago was now empty. But the conversation was not over. Not even close. Because the next step was not going to happen quietly in my kitchen. It was going to happen with David sitting at that table, hearing everything for the first time and deciding exactly which side of this he was standing on. I did not have to wait long. David called that evening, his voice tighter than usual, the careful tone from the night before replaced with something more direct. "Mom, Linda told me what happened," he said. "We need to talk." "Vedo," he replied. "Come by tomorrow morning. 9 o'clock. There was a pause, then a quiet, "Okay." I ended the call and looked around my kitchen, the same table, the same chairs, but the space felt different now. Prepared. Intentional. I spent the rest of the evening organizing everything into a single folder. Printed emails, the courier confirmation, the bank transaction details, and the legal notices from Robert. I added one more item before closing it. A printed call log from the bank, showing the exact time the authentication code had been used. A time that matched the afternoon Linda had been in my house. By the time I set the folder down, there was no gap left in the story. The next morning, David arrived 5 minutes early. He knocked once and stepped inside without waiting long, his coat still on, his expression already tense. "Morning, Mom," he said, though there was no ease in it. "Morning," I replied. "Have a seat." He sat across from me at the table, the same place Linda had been sitting less than 24 hours earlier. I noticed that immediately. "Positions matter. Linda said you think something inappropriate happened," he began. I did not correct his wording. "Not yet." "I did not think," I said. "I know." I opened the folder and slid the first document toward him, the printed email with a forged signature. "This was submitted under my name," I said. He looked down, scanning it quickly. "That could have been part of the process," he said. "Linda handles those things." I nodded once, then slid the second document forward, the courier confirmation with the tracking number. "These were sent to a title company in Michigan," I said. "Signed authorization documents." His brow tightened slightly. "Okay," he said slowly. "But that still does not mean—" I stopped him by placing the third item in front of him, the bank transaction record and the call log. "This," I said, tapping the page lightly, "is the wire transfer fee connected to that same title company. And this is the time the authentication code was entered to approve it." He looked down, following the line with his eyes. "That was 11 days ago," he said. "Yes," I replied. "At 2:43 in the afternoon." I let a brief pause settle, then added, "You remember who was in my house that afternoon?" He did not answer immediately. He did not need to. The recognition was already there. "Mom," he started, his voice lower now. I reached for my phone and tapped the screen, pulling up the email address Robert had confirmed with the property service. Then I turned it toward him. "This is the address the authorization came from," I said. "Look closely." He leaned in, squinting slightly. At first, it looked correct. Then he saw it. The extra letter. The subtle difference. His expression changed, not dramatically, but enough. "That is not your email," he said quietly. "No, Utopia. It is not." I let that sit for a moment, then I added the final piece. I reached into the folder and pulled out Robert's affidavit, placing it in front of him with the letterhead clearly visible. "And this," I said, "is the legal notice confirming that any signatures submitted without my direct authorization are invalid." David leaned back in his chair, his hands resting on the table now, no longer moving. The room was quiet again, but this time it was not uncertainty. It was realization. "Linda said she was helping," he said after a moment, his voice no longer certain, no longer defensive in the same way. "She said you did not want to deal with all of this." I held his gaze. "Did I ever tell you that?" I asked. He shook his head slowly. "No, that was a shift. Not anger. Not accusation. Just clarity placed where assumption used to be. She had access," he said, almost to himself. "You gave her access." "I gave her trust," I replied. "She turned it into authority." The distinction mattered. David looked down at the documents again, this time more carefully, as if seeing them for the first time. The timeline, the signatures, the transactions, all of it aligned in a way that did not leave room for explanation, only for acknowledgement. He exhaled slowly, running a hand through his hair. "I did not know it went this far," he said. I believed him. That was the complicated part. He had not orchestrated it, but he had allowed it. And now he was sitting in the middle of something he could no longer ignore. I closed the folder gently, gathering the documents back into place. "Now you do," I said. He nodded, but his eyes were still on the table, still processing, still recalculating everything he thought he understood. After a moment, he looked up again. "We need to talk to Linda," he said. Together. I studied him for a second, measuring the shift, the weight of what he had just accepted. Then I gave a small nod. "Yes," I said. "We do." But as he reached for his phone, already preparing to call her, I knew something he did not yet fully grasp. This conversation was not going to be about what she had done. It was going to be about what she thought she could get away with. And for the first time, she was going to have to answer without controlling the room. David did not hesitate. He pressed Linda's contact and hit call, pacing once across the kitchen as it rang. I could hear it on speaker, each tone stretching the silence tighter. When she answered, her voice was steady. "Hey," she said. "Everything okay?" David stopped walking. "No," he said, sharper than I had heard him in years. "It is not okay. I am at Mom's house. You need to come here. Now." There was a brief pause on the line. "What is going on?" Linda asked, her tone shifting, cautious now. "Just come here," he repeated. "We are not doing this over the phone." He ended the call before she could respond and set the phone down harder than necessary on the table. The sound echoed in the quiet room. He ran a hand through his hair again, his movements restless now, pacing returning in short bursts. "I cannot believe this," he muttered. "I cannot believe I did not see it." I watched him, not detached, not untouched. There was a tightening in my chest I had not allowed myself to feel until now. This was not just paperwork. This was my son, realizing that something inside his own home had been quietly rewritten without him understanding how far it had gone. "David," I said, my voice steady but not cold. "Look at me." He stopped and turned, his expression raw, conflicted. "This is not just about what she did," I said. "It is about what happens next." He nodded once, but the tension in him did not ease. It sharpened. 20 minutes later, the sound of Linda's car pulling into the driveway cut through the stillness. This time, she did not knock lightly. The door opened quickly, and she stepped inside, her coat still on, her eyes moving immediately between us. "What is this about?" she asked, her voice controlled but tight. David did not sit. He stood near the table, the documents spread out in front of him now. "You tell me," he said, "because I just went through all of this." He tapped the papers, not gently. Linda's gaze dropped to the table, scanning quickly. The email, the courier confirmation, the bank record, the affidavit. I watched her face carefully. Not panic. Not exactly. But something closer to calculation under pressure. "We talked about this," she said, looking back at him. "I told you I was handling things." Handling things. David's voice rose, not shouting, but no longer restrained. "You signed her name, Linda. You moved money. You sent documents. And you never told me what you were actually doing." Linda's jaw tightened slightly. "I was trying to move things forward," she said. "You were overwhelmed. Your mom was not keeping up with everything. And someone had to take control." "Take control?" he repeated, disbelief cutting through his tone. "That was not your call to make." She turned to me then, her expression shifting, try to regain ground. "Margaret, you know how complicated these processes can be," she said. I was trying to protect the timeline. Nothing was finalized. I felt the words hit, but they did not soften anything. They clarified it. "You used my name?" I said, my voice no longer just measured, but firm with something deeper behind it. "You entered my codes. You sent documents as if you were me. That is not protection. That is replacement." The word landed harder this time. Linda's composure cracked just slightly. "I had access because you trusted me," she said, her voice sharper now. "I did what needed to be done." David stepped forward closer to the table, his hand pressing flat against it. "No," he said, his voice low but intense. "You did what you decided was easier for you." The room held that tension, thick and immediate. No one moved for a second. Then Linda exhaled, her shoulders lifting and falling once. "So what now?" she asked, her tone no longer confident but defensive. I reached forward and placed my hand on the folder, steadying it. "Now," I said, "everything stops." I opened the folder and slid the affidavit toward her, the legal language clear, unmistakable. "Nothing you submitted moves forward. Not one document. Not one transaction. It is all under review. Linda looked down at the page, then back at me, something unreadable in her eyes now. You are escalating this, she said. This did not have to go this far. I felt something rise then, not uncontrolled, but undeniable. You took it this far the moment you decided my voice was optional, I said. David did not interrupt this time. He stood there, listening, his expression no longer uncertain. It had shifted into something else. Recognition. Responsibility. We are undoing everything, he said firmly. Every step. Every document. I do not care how long it takes. Linda looked at him, really looked this time, and whatever she saw there, it was not the same man who had deferred to her at the dinner table. The balance had changed, and she knew it. She gathered her folder slowly, her movements no longer smooth, no longer certain. This is going to get complicated, she said. It already is, I replied. She did not argue again. She turned, walked to the door, and stepped out into the cold without another word. The door closed behind her, and the silence that followed was different from before. It was not confusion. It was aftermath. David let out a long breath and sank into the chair across from me, his hands resting on the table, the documents still spread. Out between us. I should have seen it, he said quietly. I looked at him, at the man he had become, and the space we were now standing in. What matters is what you do next, I said. He nodded slowly, and as the reality of what had just happened settled into the room, one thing became clear to me in a way it had not been before. This was not just about stopping Linda. It was about deciding what place she would have in this family after everything she had done. The house stayed quiet long after Linda left, but the silence no longer felt uncertain. It felt settled, final. David sat across from me, staring at the documents as if they might rearrange themselves into something less damaging, something easier to accept. They did not. Reality had a way of holding its shape once it was fully seen. I'm calling Robert, he said finally, his voice steady now, not reactive but resolved. I want everything documented on my end too. I nodded. That would be wise. He picked up his phone and stepped into the other room, his voice low as he began explaining the situation. I did not follow. I remained at the table, my hand resting lightly on the folder, feeling the weight of what had just shifted. Not just legally, personally. Within an hour, things moved quickly, faster than Linda had ever expected. Robert called back directly, confirming that the affidavit had already triggered a formal review with the title company and that the bank had escalated the flag transaction to their fraud department. By late afternoon, there was a new development, one that changed everything from quiet correction to public consequence. My phone rang again. This time it was the bank. Mrs. Collins, the representative said, her tone more formal than before, we have completed a preliminary review of the unauthorized transaction. Based on the evidence, this case has been escalated to our fraud investigations unit, and a formal report has been filed. I listened carefully. What does that mean exactly? I asked. It means, she replied, that any individual involved in initiating or facilitating the transaction without proper authorization may be subject to legal action. We are also coordinating with the receiving institution. I closed my eyes briefly, not out of hesitation, but to steady the clarity of what that meant. This was no longer contained within the family. This had moved into something official, documented, irreversible. Thank you, I said. Please proceed. When I ended the call, I looked up to see David standing in the doorway, his expression different again. Not shock this time, not confusion, something heavier. I spoke to Robert, he said. He explained what happens next. I held his gaze. Then you understand, I replied. He nodded slowly. This is not just about us anymore. No, I said. It is not. That evening, Linda called. Not confident, not composed. The call came in sharp, almost urgent. I answered. Margaret, she said, her voice tight. What did you do? I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. I told the truth, I said, and I documented it. They contacted me, she said, the words coming faster now. The bank. They are asking questions. This is completely unnecessary. No, I replied. This is exactly necessary. There was a pause, then her tone shifted, Not controlled anymore, but strained. You could have handled this privately, she said. You did not have to involve them. I leaned slightly against the counter, grounding myself in the moment. You involved them the moment you used my name, I said. You made it official before I ever knew it existed. She did not answer right away. When she did, her voice was lower. David is overreacting, she said. We can still fix this. David is responding, I replied. There is a difference. That was the last real conversation we had. Because the next day, things did not unfold quietly. A formal notice was delivered to her, an inquiry tied to the fraudulent authorization and the unauthorized use of financial credentials. Not dramatic, not loud, but undeniable. Paper, official language. Consequences spelled out in terms that could not be softened or explained away. By the end of the week, David made his decision. There was no long discussion, no drawn-out negotiation. He came to my house again, stood in the same place he had stood before, and said, I filed for separation. I studied him for a moment, seeing not just the decision but the cost of it. Are you sure? I asked. He nodded once. She crossed a line I cannot walk back from, he said. Not after this. I believed him. And more importantly, I respected that he had finally chosen to see clearly, even when it was difficult. Linda did not come back to my house. Not after that day. Not after the investigation began. Not after the papers were served. Whatever control she thought she had built, whatever quiet system she believed she could manage without consequence, it collapsed under the weight of something simple, truth, documented, and placed exactly where it could not be ignored. A few weeks later, I stood at the lake property in Michigan, the air cold, the water still, the dock just as I remembered it. Nothing had been transferred. Nothing had been taken. Everything remained exactly where it belonged. I walked down to the edge of the water and stood there for a moment, looking out across the lake, feeling something settle inside me that had nothing to do with anger or vindication. It was clarity, ownership, not just of the property, but of my place, my voice, my authority. They had tried to move forward without me. They had tried to write me out of decisions that were mine to make. But in the end, the truth did not just stop them. It exposed them. And when it did, everything they built on that deception disappeared with it.